Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I see lots of you are joining this session. In fact, we have more than 750 registered participants. So it's fantastic that there is such a high interest in the topic of strategic agility. I'm Professor Stéphane J.G. I teach strategy and organizational innovation at IMD, and it's my pleasure to welcome you in this short, but I hope we're trying to make it as interactive as possible. I would like to thank you very much for making the time to join us in your busy schedules. So this topic of strategic agility, and I'm going to say a few words about that, but let me start by briefly highlighting what's in it for you today. So there might be a lot of misconceptions, or simply strategic agility might be a difficult term to grapple with. So my goal today is to try and unpack that concept, so that I'm going to introduce, a way of thinking about strategic agility. And importantly, you will see that you cannot be agile strategically without reconciling competing demands, because the whole essence of what we're going to cover is that if you choose between either or, the traditional way of approaching trade-offs, you might be too inflexible as uncertainty strikes and thrives around us. So the whole transformation about agility is to build that flexibility, that power of innovation, that power of entrepreneurship, so that we are flexible in the face of uncertainty. And that means we are going to have to handle competing demands. And I'm going to become more specific about that. So before I go forward, let's allow me to introduce myself briefly. So I joined IMD 5 years ago. I direct a certain amount of corporate relationships on the custom program side. I'm also the co-director of one of our digital diploma programs called Digital Execution. So how do you make sure that your digital transformation sticks, if you like? And because my first career was working in the luxury industries, I also do a lot of activities with luxury customers, and I invented a program 5 years ago called the Reinventing Luxury Lab. And I write a monthly column in Forbes about innovation and disruption in the luxury sectors. In my private life, I'm a passionate tennis player. So not only do I watch tennis, but for me, it's even more important to play. So I would like to start with this, take a couple of seconds to read these cartoons. So let's start on a humoristic tone. And, we've always heard that strategy is about making commitment, choices to prepare the long term. So is there a contradiction in terms, right? Usually people can be agile, but why are we talking about agile in strategy or strategic agility? And I have, I'm going to ask you, we're going to do several discussion moments in this webinar and polls. And if you want to join menti.com using the code that I put there, or use your scanner to get automatically in the poll, I'm going to launch a first question. So a high majority of you think it's a buzzword. 2/3, 1/3 at the moment. So those of you who think it's a buzzword, could you write down in the chat why do you voted for that option? And I will do the same afterwards for those who didn't vote for that. So first answers by Bogdan is that the term is not defined clearly. Yeah, I think you're right. It's not very, very specific. It could be something more concrete, but what is it exactly? So it's a fluffy definition, but the mindset is important. So what I see emerging here is that from some of you, maybe it's not a buzzword really, but it's not very clear what this is about, right? And there's also this perhaps confusion with agile methods. It's in fashion right now. Although we've been talking about strategic agility, the first time it appeared was 15 years ago, okay? It's coming at the forefront of attention, and we're going to look at why now. So if you said it is not a buzzword, why did you say it is not? Could you please write in the chat? Because strategy has to be more dynamic. It's false confidence. So we are in a changing environment. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that, the environment. So how do you adapt to a dynamic environment? Some of you talk about VUCA. We're going to review that. Developing options, exactly. And the need to continuously adapt, right? So adaptability come in a strong way. All right, thank you very much for sharing these views. And I have a second question for you, and perhaps you've started to address that, but it's the why question. You know, why are you interested in this concept? Yeah, so the turbulence, VUCA keeps coming here at the center, the need for greater adaptability. Some of you think it's about surviving, and I hope it's better than surviving. I will try to illustrate that it's also about winning, not just surviving. Yeah, Karen, you talk about organizational agility. We're not going to focus so much about it today, but it's a very connected capability. Today, we're going to really look at the strategy level. So dealing with uncertainty, and it's connected to the VUCA world, the need to change, and there is even fast change, the need for speed. I like that someone of you in the chat also mentioned, but it's not just about speed. It cannot be just about speed, and I really agree with that statement. It's about the need for innovating, winning, so there's a lot of ideas that come in here, and some of them are overlapped. We could aggregate that further, but thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to pause on the survey now. So, I think what you're saying is really, really important. This concept of that we're living in a much more, or at least highly uncertain world, that concept that's been crystallized with VUCA. But the research insights that I would like to share with you today, if I go back at why I undertook this research, is that, the traditional school of strategy that Michael Porter really championed back in the 1980s and afterwards, was that there is really the company's job, the strategy's job, is to defend the competitive advantage of the firm, right? We at IMD, some of my colleagues have started to do a lot of research showing that, more and more industries and companies have been disrupted by digital transformation. Every 2 years, we survey at IMD globally thousands of executives, where we ask them to say how much digital strategy is challenging them, and we position that in the digital vortex, where it moves really fast, it's chaotic. Companies can be pulled in the center and suddenly back on the outside, or reciprocally. New entrants come at any time. It's really, really unexpected. And it gives the opportunities for many companies to actually reshift the industry boundaries, which were really the core of the Porterian view of strategy. So much so that about 10 years ago, my colleague at Columbia University wrote this book, The End of Competitive Advantage, just to show you the shift in how academic thinking and science has been changing around strategy. So that really provoked my research questions, right? Because I was also seeing that the number of years that companies stay as industry leaders was rapidly going down. And you could say, why are they rapidly going down? Is first reason, something that's extremely dangerous for companies. It's what I call the success trap. You know, we are making so much money, we're so successful, that why would we change in the first place a winning formula? Except that in this digital vortex and highly uncertain and dynamic environment, it can be really dangerous to have this mindset, because what makes you successful now, you cannot predict that it's going to make you successful tomorrow. That's the essence of the complexity in VUCA. Another reason is that companies might be very satisfied to what I call play not to lose and survive, but very few companies are able to jump to next S-curves, new growth success stories, and start playing to win and reshifting the rules in their industries. So I was seeing that evidence, the academic shift, but at the same time, I was looking at some companies, and I was, companies that have been in operations for decades, sometimes centuries, and still being very successful. So I undertook a research project that culminated in this new book, Resetting Management, where I really asked the question, so how do certain companies thrive in uncertain environments and others don't? And I discovered certain principles or capabilities around agility that I looked at the strategy, organizational design, and leadership levels. So today I would like to focus with you on the strategy part, okay? This book, by the way, was selected as one of the top 10 best book by CEO Today magazine last year. So, you're very welcome to check it out. So let's go back to our survey. And I have another question for you here. I know a lot of you say the concept is really not clear, and I'm going to clarify it, but what's your take? What is it? What do you think it is, strategic agility? So Christopher, thank you. It's a way of adapting, understanding new market needs. By the way, hi, nice to see you here, Christopher. Thank you, Libor, for your recommendation of my book. DIA, it's about flexibility, the ability to shift resources rapidly. It's about strategy and action. I love that. And then you have some answers here on the screen directly. Knowing the limitation and challenges and solve them properly. Yeah. Adaptability to change. Ability to rethink and adapt strategy. Yeah, very good. Having awareness. We're going to look at that as well. And I think, that's why the concept is a little bit difficult to unpack, because there are so many, components, ingredients to build strategic agility. So we're going to try and make sense of that. And just by curiosity, I have another question here. To what extent is your business strategically agile, do you think? Okay, very interesting. So it's very split on the weak to moderate. I'm not surprised. I see that very consistently. But let me ask the 10% of you who has voted for a high degree of agility. if you could write in the chat why. And it's a great question, Alice. Thank you very much. What is your industry as well? From which industry are you from? You, the 10%. So Andrew says he's in IT. Hans-Peter in manufacturing. Guillaume in oil and gas. Oh, consulting. So quite a diversity of sectors. So, but tell us why. Why? Oh, Sebastian in the pulp and paper industry. I'm going to draw on an example from that a little bit later. It is true that you can be agile in a lot of different sectors. And of course, the degree of agility you will need in more stable sectors compared to the dynamic ones, you know, those that are at the center of the digital vortex might be also different. Yeah, in pharma, you know, I was reading these reports about how Pfizer and Moderna actually managed to get those new types of vaccines very well. And one big discovery is that actually it looked fast, but preparation before was really, really long. They had developed the platform for the new mRNA type of approach, but what they didn't have was the final part, which is the virus that corresponded to COVID. So there was a lot of preparation before. There was some modularity, you know, on which you can then branch out and adapt for the final mile and accelerate the product development. I think that was really interesting. Okay. A dedicated strategy group, very integrated with the business platforms. Yeah, that can help. So how you strategize, you know, whether this is cut off at headquarters or whether this is really collaborative throughout the organization. In other words, how top-down and bottom-up approaches to strategizing will also be an essential capability, and we can look at that later. Yeah, so what you're saying is the importance of being hyper-aware. You know, we look at things, we are curious, we try to identify changes, even weak signals, and we deliberately act upon those. Some of you have actually phased out waterfall approaches to strategic initiatives, so perhaps you've replaced them with agile ways of working. So we're going to look at that also in a moment, but that's that can help you speed up. Okay. Those of you who said you were weak, what were the main bottlenecks? Yeah, the fear of changing, the success trap, fragmented market, so the market structure, yeah, top-down only, the culture, not maybe prone to change. Yeah, talent is very important as well. Okay. Yeah, so pretty consistent with, you know, not willing to change, fear of changing, not knowing how to change, the success trap. So let's look a little bit at these sources of the culture very often. So really culture is the habits that everyone has. So if no one is really used to changing or taking initiatives or innovating, then of course we will all collectively stagnate. The culture of experimentation, cost of change, right? So it's this fear probably of self-cannibalizing that come with that. Okay. Thank you for sharing these thoughts with all of us. And what I would like to build now on your answers is what are the main sources of rigidity? If we want to understand agility, we have to start with the opposite situation, which is the company's rigidity. So in a lot of cases, we have companies where there is the fear of challenging the status quo. It's sometimes not understanding enough and not connecting enough with the realities of the outside world. But sometimes when you know the outside world, you still don't want to change because you have this uncertainty of change and you have the will of not self-cannibalizing. So in a lot of companies, we talk about this excessive stability. The hearts and minds are not about challenging the status quo. And I call that the stability. Excessive stability will make you rigid because you're playing to not to lose, you're playing for today without necessarily preparing for tomorrow and thinking about what if questions, something radically different happens to us. The second reason, and that's a little bit less understood, is this simplistic approach to strategy. And, far from having common goals, executives in companies will actually tend to push their own agenda. At the time of budget, it's about protecting your ongoing initiatives. It's about impressing the board. It's about thinking career succession. How can I go up the ladder? So, if you start taking risks and if it doesn't go well, you might actually jeopardize your chances of going up. And everyone knows that at the end of the day, the budget is going to be where the battles are decided. And in a lot of companies, what also happens is that when everyone is fighting for their projects, it's really difficult to decide who are going to be the winners and the losers. So budgets, or sometimes CEOs even, instead of frustrating people, will actually spread the peanut butter with continuing the projects across the division so that at the end of the day, the resources that people have are too thinly distributed to actually make an impact and allow companies to leap forward, to jump to their next S-curve and prepare the portfolio of options that can make them more successful and more prepared in this context of faster disruption and uncertainty. So I call that situation the simplistic approach to strategy. And these two reasons, risk aversion, the social process of strategy, the politicking that goes behind it, actually can both entrench companies' rigidity. Okay? So what's the impact of those situations? Is that companies will move through very incremental small steps. The environment around them might start changing really, really much more drastically, sometimes more rapidly. It depends on the industry. So much so that if the company doesn't change, at the end of the day, the gap with the environment is so high that you need one big jump of strategic renewal, which is an immense effort, or you could say even turn around in certain situations, or you die. So strategic agility is a much more dynamic process of approaching strategic choices. It's a capability for dynamically adapting the strategy content, but also how you strategize, so that's the process, to suit your environment, or I would say even better, to shape the environment. That's the power of strategy. Let's not forget that strategy, if you're good at it, you can actually shape a new environment. Think about how Apple reshaped a completely cluster of industries and created a completely new environment that at the end of the day, it still dominates, even though it's highly competitive. So let's push this definition forward. Okay, so if we are too stable, our job as strategists is to become nimbler, more experimental, and probably launch and explore for new growth opportunities a little bit faster. That's what I call the quality of nimbleness. However, for most companies, as much as you want to create those experiments, to have those portfolio of options, to prepare for the future in response to uncertainty, if you only concentrate on exploring and being fast, you might create chaos. And that's a paradox, is that for strategic agility, you need to find the right degree of nimbleness, but you will probably need to continue to think about stability. So what we see emerging here is how are you going to handle that competing demand between nimble and stable. Secondly, if we are a little bit too simplistic about how we strategize the content of our strategy, our job is going to make much more sophisticated choices in order to prepare for that uncertainty. And that's the second type of competing demand that I would like to bring forward to you today. So those competing demands, and in the case studies that I researched, I'm going to show you that I identified 5 types of competing demands where the more agile companies are trying to handle or even reconcile. And some of these competing demands are based on the what of strategy, so the strategy content, so where do we win, how do we win? But some of these competing demands also relate to the strategy process. So how do we strategize? The first competing demand that more strategically agile companies will handle is not only do they want to protect the core business, but at the same time, they're going to move to faster experimentation of next growth opportunities and create that portfolio of future options of next S-curves. And what they try to do is these 2 things at the same time. Rigid company would just be either or, protecting the core, but forgetting to prepare for that uncertainty and forgetting to explore for next growth opportunities. The second type of competing demand, especially for large established companies, that are publicly listed, where shareholders require returns even every quarter, you still can't get rid of discipline, planning, attention to resource allocation, the culture of performance. But somehow you have to make also resource allocation much more fluid to support the experimentation that is going to be required. So not just the budgeting process needs to be adapted to be more fluid, but even the strategizing, the planning process will require that. And more strategically agile companies tend to do both of these 2 things. It's not either or, but it's both and. The quality of your portfolio is also very important, right? A lot of companies over the past decades have spent a lot of time simplifying their portfolio to refocus, okay? The real question for you is, I understand that if we have too complex a portfolio of countries, product line, customer segments, it's going to become very difficult to allocate resources in a meaningful way. But if your portfolio is simplistic, then you might miss growth opportunities that are already existing right there. And the problem is that a lot of companies make these portfolio decisions without really going into the depth of their data and looking at granular, not looking enough at granular data, looking more at averages. Another way to become more sophisticated in how you strategize, and that's the dimension I'm going to focus on with concrete examples in a moment, is really about how you handle the competing demand between executive teams or strategists that are going to be really encouraging and inspiring new deviant thinking, even outlier thinking, because you won't be able to create the next markets without having a certain amount of high creativity. But at the time of execution, everyone needs to be disciplined enough to come and take those innovation projects forward. And finally, the other dimension, especially in the digital age, companies have tended to want to do as many things as possible in-house to control the resources, control the talent, and it's simpler to manage when it's in-house. But more and more, the one success factors for strategic agility is to open innovation initiatives to an ecosystem of partnerships. And that becomes much more complicated or complex to orchestrate, right? So you will have to make decisions between what stays in-house, but also think about what do we do outside so that we create much more fluidity, much more innovativeness in the company. Okay, so your job as a strategist, if you want to create those capabilities of strategic agility, is to think, first of all, about what our strategic competing demands are. In my research, I've identified these 5 important ones. It's possible in your business you will have others. But please remember to think about those competing demands, because your next task, once you have identified those, is to start thinking, so now that I know I need to do these 2 things, how am I going to do that? And it's quite difficult because there will be tensions. When you try to reconcile those competing demands, there will be tensions. And you will have to identify what these tensions are and try to find solutions to resolve those tensions. And my job in the rest of the time we have is to give you a couple of examples and to help you think about what are the tensions that are going to come our way if we want to shift to this both and thinking and practice of strategy. And I would like to focus on the competing demand number 4. Okay, ideation, where we're going to need a lot of creativity, even outlier creativity, and at the time of execution, leadership unity. And, think about how Kodak is a great example of why a company that doesn't do both is in danger. It's because, Kodak had a lot of great ideas. They even invented the digital camera. The problem was that the leadership was not committed to shift their attention, shift resources, shift capabilities and talents in this new direction. So as much as you have a lot of new ideas, but you don't have discipline in the execution so that your leadership makes it their own, you're not going to be able to create your next portfolio of initiatives and be prepared to uncertainty. So I have a question for you here, which is, why is it difficult to do both things in an organization? What are the existing tensions that are going to come along your way? Great. So here we have very interesting solutions. So a couple of you mentioned separating new businesses from old businesses. The research shows that there is no one best way here. If you separate or you integrate, the key success factor is going to be about the links you build between future businesses and current businesses or existing businesses. But it's about running, experimenting, yeah. You need resources, so specific budgets for that. Creating the links, aligning the incentives. Yes, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Clarifying the purpose. Yeah, Luis Rodriguez, thank you for this point. Why are we doing that? Why it's important? Culture of trust. Yeah, the psychological safety is going to be really, really important. Win-win situation for all stakeholders. Disagree and commit. Yeah, that's the famous Jeff Bezos motto. You know, it's not about personal egos here. It's about the benefit of the company, and it's all right if your idea is not retained this time or it's not the best. Your idea might be the best one next time. You know, but what we make sure, and we're going to look at how can you make people commit, even though these innovation projects are not originally theirs, because that can really stand on the way. That's the ego question. So yeah, indeed, thank you so much for sharing these points. And I would like to come to my examples. So there are at least 7 types of tensions that will stop executive teams to both be super creative and accept the need for outlier thinking, and to then agree and commit at the time of execution. So the first one could be the career ambition, right? So you are in charge of a division. You want to play safe because if something wrong happens, your career might not progress. Then there's the ego story. You know, we think we have the best ideas. My projects are the best. You know, I want more money for my projects, irrespective or not whether they are going to prepare the company for the future and for the uncertainty. You might have questions of too much homogeneity in the teams. You know, at the time when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, which is also true for top teams, you know, a lot of top teams sometimes come from the same business schools or have the same social professional background, and that will stifle innovation and the ability of someone in the team coming up with an outlier idea that could push the needle forward. Another important question is there psychological safety in the team or in the organization to stick one head out? You know, or are you going to be punished or think about a non-trustworthy person if you come up with really radically new ideas? That might limit the potential for creativity. The more you will go up in the organization, the more you might find people who are cut off from the realities of the market. Okay, and on top of that, sometimes they're not aware of it or they're not prepared to admit to it, right? It can be a question of skills. You know, the more senior people are, they might miss some skills. You know, if we're talking about digital transformation, they're not necessarily the best prepared for leading and seizing the opportunities in that environment. And simply, you know, you might have executives who are overwhelmed by the number of strategic initiatives that already exist. So if you don't control the number of these things, you might be impossible, you know, to even add something like that. So I would like to bring a first example of a company that was facing similar problems. This company is the leader of the hospitality sector in Europe, called the Groupe Accor, which has many, many brands of hotels. And after years of effort through classic top-down strategic initiatives, was not managing to find a solution to Airbnb challenge, especially in the younger, the Gen Z and the millennial generations that wanted something new. So Hervé Bazin, at that time, the CEO, still the CEO, said our traditional approach doesn't work. With the chief marketing officer, decided actually to give to their junior employees the opportunity to come up with a solution. And they created a team of 6 women, 6 men, millennials, who, using agile methods to prototype, created the minimum viable products until they find a really, really customer-centric and viable proposition that gave birth to a new brand in the Accor portfolio, the Joe and Joey brand. So I'm going to show you a quick video that tells you what this new type of hospitality looks like.
You think you got it, but you don't have it all together.
Okay, so what do we learn from the Accor story, right? So I would like to show you some examples. Some of the tensions we had were that the idea were blocked by, if you like, the type of diversity experience that was present at the top of the organization at that moment. And we needed a CEO who was prepared to try a new approach by bringing much more diversity, by asking the millennials themselves to come up with this project and placing them directly under his patronage and the one of the chief marketing officer, so that they could be shielded from corporate pressure, from cost imperatives, and also have access to resources throughout the company much more rapidly. So there was here a key decisions about people and leaders that had to be made. Some of you mentioned also the incentives, because what can go wrong is that the rest of the executive team might say, oh, Joe and Joey might become a competitor to my Novotel or my Mercure hotels. Why should I actually support this initiative? So it's going to be really important to make a win-win for everyone. So what was decided is that for people under 25 years old, there would be a reallocation program where the millennial or young generation could stay in any of the Accor hotel at a discount. So that was a way for the other hotel divisional managers to also collaborate much more with the Joe and Joey team and initiatives. I think what's important also is how in the teams you create the psychological safety. From a structure perspective, in a lot of teams, it's not okay to come and challenge a colleague because that colleague has more experience. It's her field, so you're not going to challenge that. I think here, in the team dynamic that the CEO wanted to create, it's much more collegiality. he instituted, for example, in strategic discussion meetings, at turn, everyone would play the role of the devil's advocate. So it's about separating the ideas from the persons in order to create that habit of critical thinking, of bringing something new to the table, but collaborating so that everyone can contribute in the team new ideas, essential for psychological safety. A final set of measures that was introduced was actually a dashboard rewarding all the top management on the percentage of new ideas and new initiatives that they would generate, not just from the existing business, but also the other businesses, so that this collaboration with Joe and Joey and this new startup within the firm would not be killed off right from the start. I would like to give you another example. One of you is from the pulp and paper industry, but at IMD, we actually have done a lot of work with Stora Enso, the Swedish-Finnish pulp and paper company, where the top management saw, the CEO saw that it would become unsustainable to rely solely on pulp and paper. And the job was to find a future for that company. So through a collaborative learning and development program with IND called Pathfinders, some teams of more junior employees were brought and instructed to find new strategic directions from the company, for the company. And every of the member of the top management team would have to sponsor and coach and be involved in these innovation projects, right? So a way of, if you like, avoiding that I have not invented that project and I'm not going to support it at the time of the execution, so bringing early that involvement of these initiatives. So little by little, Pathfinder helped Stora Enso to become a big sustainable energy player. Between 2011, when we started, and 2018, we managed to, Stora Enso share doubled. And by 2018, 76% of the company's revenues were coming from new streams of business for Stora Enso, right? So you see again a need for much creative thinking, by the way, with the humility to accept that if you are a senior guy, you might not have all the answers. And that's super important in the agile mindset that we're going to live, is that collaboration and sharing will develop learning and develop diversity, which is a better source to be prepared for that uncertainty, right? And he created the conditions for those new innovation projects to be actually carried out by the top executive team, as opposed to be killed in the butt by the perennial political process that is gripping a lot of established organizations. So I chose to focus on this competing demand number 4, because companies might have a lot of good ideas, but they struggle to implement them because there are all these reasons of structure, politics, social movements. And I think this aspect is very frequently overlooked. So I hope you find that useful today. So what's my final word if you think about how can you unpack that concept of strategic agility? It's all in all, it's about shifting from either or to both and practice. It's about reconciling competing demands to become more flexible and entrepreneurial. So to do that, you first need to realize why dynamism is important, and it's accepting that it's important. For example, avoiding the success trap. Your job is also to be clear about what are the strategic trade-offs that you would like to minimize. What are the competing demands that are going to be really specific and important to resolve in your business, and then start integrating those demands by resolving the tensions that you will find along your way to make both happen. And remember, this is not linear. Agility is about iteration. It's about revisiting. It's about learning, right? So what you decide to optimize for both and might need to change over time. Or you might discover that you have new competing demands you need to face. We have time for a few questions now. Oh, okay, Bogdan has already asked a question. So what would be my choice of innovation KPIs? Well, what's the share, the percentage of new initiatives, of new business streams to the firm that has been created, and follow that quarter by quarter and reward management for those objectives. And making sure that this happens not just in a wing of your business where you so-called incubate the next businesses, but also in the mainstream business. Okay, so I think it's time. Thank you very much for your attention. If you want to stay in touch, feel free to join me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter. And you can check out also Resetting Management, which is available on any bookstores now. So I really enjoyed your contribution. I hope it was useful for you. Thank you for joining in such high numbers. And we all look forward to seeing you at IMD.